A person who needs no introduction, being one of the most experienced and successful entrepreneurs of India. He was the co-founder of HCL Group, founder of TechSpan, and also the CEO of US-based Headstrong firm. Being an inclusive person, he also founded Spic Macay to promote Indian music and culture amongst the youth. It would take hours to introduce and mention the achievements of Mr. Arjun Malhotra. Let us not get there and listen to him. Also, to all of you who are here, this is a lovely opportunity to interact with him. We would start listening to him and then followed by around 15 minutes of question and answer session from students and the last 15 minutes of question answer from teachers. Be ready for a pumped up evening. Are you all excited? Let's begin. So, shall we start?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that very kind introduction.
Okay, sir. Sir, how was your school life? What were your dreams? And what was your life before HCL?
Okay, so I was born in Calcutta. I was born at home, as was in the norm in those days. My mother was a medical doctor, but a teaching medical doctor. So she was in preventive and social medicine, something that public health, hygiene, family planning, something that you see today and that is very important when you're looking at this COVID problem.
True.
I was born at home, and in fact, my godmother, who delivered me, was her best friend, was a Jewish lady who also went to medical school with her in Calcutta. So I grew up, fortunately, my dad was in the army. My grandfather, maternal grandfather, was a fairly well-known scientist. Any of you who have done zoology may remember or know his name. He was president of the Science Congress in 1954. Dr. Sundarlal Hora, S.L. Hora, probably India's best-known fisheries expert, ichthyologist.
Okay,
Right.
great, got it.
So I grew up with him. So he would take me for a walk around Victoria Memorial in the morning. When I was a little kid, I'd hold his finger and he'd be talking to his scientist friends and he'd tell me 2 plus 5, 3 plus 2. So by the time I went to kindergarten and nursery, I knew my math. And so what used to happen was when the teacher would write the problem on the board and draw the two lines, I would give the answer. So I got thrown out of my math class as a disruptive influence and sent to Bible knowledge because this was at Loretta House in Calcutta. And so, I've always had that feeling that, hey, I know my math, I know, and which is why I went and did engineering. But when I grew up, the thinking was to be either a scientist or a researcher or a teacher. That was really what my plan was. Since my dad was in the army, he got transferred to Delhi in 1956, I think it was, when I was 7 years old. And then we were in Delhi. I was in school in Delhi. And then what happened was my dad got called up for the 1962 Chinese War. So he got posted to the front. And my mother got a Ford Foundation fellowship to go do her postdoctoral work at the Howard School of Public Health.
Okay.
And so both the children had to go into boarding schools. And so I was lucky. I had been registered. My grandmother had registered me at the Doon School in Dehradun, and I was lucky to get admission there. And my sister went to Tara Hall in Simla. So my mother came back after a year or so. They couldn't afford two children in boarding school, so my sister got pulled to a day school. She's 3 years younger. And because I was close to my senior Cambridge, I continued at Doon. And again, my plan at Doon was to do science, engineering, become a researcher. I joined IIT only because, how do I put it? I wanted to do something on my own. I wanted to get into college on my own merit. My school results were pretty good. And I also decided I wanted to do electronics. And in those days, there were 5 IITs. All the 5 IITs had a department of electrical engineering. Only Kharagpur had a department of electronics and electrical communication engineering, which was separate from the electrical engineering department. And, I don't know about kids nowadays, but who reads those detailed prospectuses that come? So I said, I want to do electronics, I'll go to Kharagpur. The electronics department at Kharagpur had only 30 seats. So I told myself that if I want to make sure I do it, I have to get a rank below 30 in JEE. Otherwise, I may not get my chance. And so I have never worked harder than that in my life. I finally got a 32 rank, and
Wow.
that was
Okay.
12th in North Zone. So when I went for the interview, I was very nervous. But I talked to some people who were ahead of me in the interview, and they wanted to do mechanical in Delhi and something else. So I figured out at least three or four of them were not doing electronics, so I was sure to get it. So that was peace of mind, which is why I went to Kharagpur, did electronics. And right after finished college, I was going to go to Stanford or Berkeley. I had a choice, and I was going to work for NASA. In fact, the other funny thing in my life was when I did my electronics, computers was an option which I didn't take. I took control systems because I thought if I work for NASA, I'll be, controlling satellites that are in the sky, and so I better know my control systems. Excuse me, computers wasn't that important. But life is quite strange. It changes in different ways. Uh, I don't know how much time I have, but I didn't even apply for jobs in India. I was that sure of what I was going to do. My mother sent me a cutting of a senior management trainee job, and I'm really a sucker for logic. She had one line in it that I've never forgotten. It said, "Interviews are like exams. The more you do, the better you are at them." And I accept that as logic. So just to acknowledge that, I filled the form and I sent it. So when I came to Delhi, I got the call, I did the test. Some 12,000 people sit for the exam. I was called for a first interview. After that, they called 30 people for the final interview. And they choose 8 to 12 people. Then it becomes an ego problem. If I've come so far, let me see if I can get the job. And so next thing I know, I get this telegram in 1970 when I graduated that you got the job, 950 rupees a month. I don't know how to describe it to you, but 950 rupees was the king's ransom in those days. I asked my father, and he said, it took me 10 years to get a 4-digit salary, and I was going to be staying at home in Delhi. So I decided, why not try this for a year? And I wrote to Stanford. They kept my admission open, said, you reapply for aid. My GRE scores were quite good, so I wasn't worried about it. So I took the job at DCM, and then that's basically how I got into a job. It was, I mean, it not I thought I had my whole life planned, but it worked out completely differently. And so I just wanted to say that look, you might think you can plan your life, but ultimately, whatever the opportunities that come or the things that happen, you have to follow them. And if some of them become opportunities, you must grab them. You can't actually ignore them. That's really that's really how I grew up. I mean, it was a with my grandfather. It was quite motivating because lots of scientists used to come home. I mean, Meghnad, some big names that I can mention. I remember the one I remember vividly is Julian Huxley. When he came to Calcutta, he stayed at my grandfather's place. So I got to meet him. Not that I knew who he was because I was a little kid, but yeah. But when you read about it later, it does sort of motivate you to say, yeah, these people were real. They were world renowned scientists, and it was a great motivation. I think that's one big advantage I had in my life.
So, how did it go forward to starting HCL? Like, how was the journey after you joined the job in Delhi to the co-founding of HCL? How is the journey?
Yeah, so the DCM senior management trainee job for 1 year, they treat you like they give you one classes, then they send you to different units. So you go through manufacturing. It's like an MBA program, but done a little differently, specifically for the company. Now, DCM was the fourth largest company in the country in those days, private company. And it was the Delhi Cloth and General Mills Company Limited. They made textiles, they made fertilizer, they made rayon tire cord, they made chemicals, they made vanaspati. I mean, they were a real conglomerate. So I went through different units at different times and, lots of learning, and I can talk about that sometime. But towards the end of my first year there, the company decided, Mr. Vinay Bharatram, who was the executive director, son of Dr. Bharatram, they decided to get into electronics. Electronics was just emerging. They had gone to Japan and met with Sony and whatever. And there weren't too many electronics engineers in the company. In fact, I was probably the only one. I don't know. But I got called up by the big boss, and I was told 1 year out of college, I was told that, look, we are getting into electronics. You're either going to head R&D and production, or you're going to head sales and marketing. It all depends on who we can find. So they were able to find someone from ITI who then took over the part, and I was told you look after the sales. And so 1 year out of college, you're suddenly given a new product in a big company to look after national sales. It was, it was scary but exciting. And so, I think, we did a lot of very interesting things. DCM was the big gorilla, if I use that term. We had 80% of the market and stuff like that. And of course, technology progressed. So it moved into bit slice, it moved into microprocessors. And when microprocessors came out, we actually had our own R&D. So we developed a mini microcomputer, whatever you call it, but it was a computer. And in those days, India was a socialist country. We had an act called the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, which didn't allow large private companies to get into new areas. So we took the line internally that we were making programmable calculators, and that a computer was just a programmable calculator under a slightly different name, right? All you do is write a program and the machine does give you a solution. But their legal department advised them not to do it because, we were out of a 250 crore revenue company, we were 1.7 crores. So in a way, now from the company point of view, I understand where they were coming from. But when you're 25, 26 years old, you think you've opened a whole new market with a whole new technology. You've got microprocessors coming out, and we really believed microprocessors were going to change the world. We just thought you don't see the end of your life, so to say. You don't see things are going to plateau out at this point. So 6 of us who worked there decided to leave. We said we knew the market, that let's go out, sell calculators, make some money, and invest that into developing computers. That was the basic objective. So we left in October 75, 15th October 75. We went to 3 places, 2 people in each place, 2 in Calcutta, 2 in Bombay, 2 in Delhi. I went to Calcutta with Pammi Puri. The whole idea was that it might become depressing if things don't happen, so you want someone there who you can talk to. That was the whole idea. And, the company did really well. We got some good breaks. So by December, we had enough money to invest into making or developing computers. So we recruited some technical people and made our own computer. And by March, we were sort of ready. And then we realized that the government had restricted computer manufacturing to state and public sector corporations. So private companies weren't allowed to get into it. So we finally signed what was called a joint sector agreement with the UP Electronics Corporation. Joint sector means that the private party owns 25%, the government owns 26%, and 49% is public. But the total equity was only 20 lakhs. So we had to go public for 9.8 lakhs, where the cost of going public is more than 9.8 lakhs. So we ended up owning 74% because then the founders took over that part of the share. And so UP Electronics, the government through UP Electronics owned 26%, we owned 75%. And we chose the name Hindustan Computers Limited because we thought that when people buy computers, they want to buy it from a solid company. They don't want to buy it from a startup. And so a name like Hindustan Computers Limited would sound solid and would give us a little advantage.
Yes.
So that's how the company started, basically. I mean, I can tell you some interesting stories about how we got our first check and stuff, but those are folklore in a way. But that's the way things work. When we started it, we didn't have a business plan. We didn't have any money. We only had a conviction that microprocessors were going to change the world. And there was a passion that, look, computers are going to be what's going to come in. And fortunately for us, our competition was IBM and ICL, but selling and old technology computers. I mean, they were good computers, but very old technology. And we thought technology is everything. We can kill them. Wasn't true, and we found out the hard way later. But yes, when you believe you have the best technology and they are trying to sell India junk, that's what we thought, and rightly so. They were giving India some old machines, not their latest technology. That's how HCL started. That's what That's what got us to where we were.
That's really inspiring how the thirst for innovation, passion, conviction could, really change the world. That's very inspiring. Moving on, what are the key takeaways from your journey where you held positions from being an entrepreneur to director of many startups? And now that you have been an advisor yourself to many startups, so what has been your key takeaways?
So key takeaways, there are different things at different times in a company. So when you start a company, it's like having a baby. Actually, I can't think of any other way. When you have a child, and now I've got grandchildren, so I can talk about it. The first few years are what the child becomes to a large extent is the way and what you've taught them and the value system you give them in the first few years, right? Same thing is true in a company. It's the culture, as they call it, of the company is set in the first few years. It's a question of how you behave, who you recruit, etc., etc. So one of the things we did was, when we started the company, we decided that we would be completely transparent. That I mean, there was no money to be made, so it was an easy decision, and we would keep the company completely transparent, right? Over a period of time, we've realized that one of the strengths the IT industry has, and one of the strengths that we had in HCL, was the fact that we were professionally run. It didn't matter if I was the founder. I took a salary like anyone else. I had to meet a performance target like everyone else. Yes, I own stock in the company, and that may have been a benefit, but that stock didn't give me any other benefit other than I owned the stock like any other public shareholder. And that's how we ran HCL. And it's lovely to see that every IT company, or not every, most IT companies in this country followed that model, which is one reason why IT is seen as such a good profession. And a lot of young people, even today, want a profession in IT. And I really, it's not a decision we took deliberately. It's a decision we took because there were 6 of us, and we said, look, we don't want any problems amongst us. We're going to go to different parts of the country. Let's keep it completely transparent. And I think that really, really paid off in terms of the long run. So one thing is, you've got to walk the talk. If you say, my logic is I don't ask someone to do something I won't do myself. So if they say no to me, I go do it myself. They feel ashamed next time they don't say no. Right. So that's number one. Number two, try and recruit people who are smarter than you. Now, I mean, I can tell you a lot of people believe there's no one smarter than them, but there are smarter people and they are out there. So go find them. And when you find them and recruit them, listen to them. Don't just get them in and expect them to do what you tell them to do. Right. And the third thing is, of course, keep the company transparent, keep it completely open. And, as the company grows, so, when you get, depending on what your size is, when you get to about 10, 20, 30 crores, 50 crores in that range, then no longer is, the company problems are there, but people problems become most important. And you have to now deal with people, because your communication doesn't go through clearly. To if someone understands something, someone understands something else, and then they have interpersonal problems, then they have problems at home, some of which come into the office, and so you spend a large part of your time managing people. So I tell people that if you can motivate your people, if people believe they can do something, then there's a much better probability that they will do it. If you give them impossible targets and they don't believe the targets can be met or they can achieve it, it'll never get achieved. So you have to work with your people to make them believe that something can be done. It's, individually as kids, you've got to, I get back to my math. whenever I walked into a math test, I always felt that I was entitled to get 100%. That was my right to get 100 out of 100 in any mathematical test I did. If I didn't get it, my fault. What did I do wrong? But I went in with the mindset that I will get 100. It was my right to get 100, And so I think people have to think that way when you're starting a company. Nothing is, and again, you've got to be flexible. What you want to do when you started and what you end up doing can be quite different. And you have to listen to the signals that you get and change direction if you need to change direction. You've also got to, you can't have an ego when you're starting a company. You've got to, when you make a wrong decision and you've got 10 people working with you, call them into a room and say, I'm sorry, this decision was wrong. Someone else might have given a right suggestion, said, I should have listened to you, but now I'm willing to change and let's do what you said. And again, the other thing I would tell people is never tell people I told you so. Even if, you're right and someone else took a decision and that was wrong, and they come back to you and say, and they do what you're doing without even telling you about it, that's the other thing. And finally, I'd like to tell people that ultimately, why are you doing this? I mean, I don't think you should start a company or do something to make money. That should be a byproduct of changing the world or achieving your goals or whatever you're doing. I think the important thing is for an individual, I am talking about myself now and I think it applies to everyone, is you try and have to be the kind of person where you like yourself. When you put your head on the pillow at night to go to sleep, you should feel good about yourself. You should spend 5-10 minutes thinking of what did you do in the day that you wished you hadn't done. And most of the time is out of anger or out of whatever, you say something that you wish you shouldn't have said to someone. Important thing is to get up next morning, meet that person and apologize and say, I didn't mean it. I'm sorry I said that. I'm surprised how few people do something like that. But when you do that, you build a level of trust that works really well. I mean, I think ultimately, now I'm getting a little philosophical. If you go back to our scriptures, what do they say? It says when you're dead and gone, all you leave behind are your children and your reputation, right? Your money, nothing of it matters. All that matters, all that people remember you for your children and the reputation you leave behind. And so I think if we live our life thinking about that, and that's very important, I think that's what will make people better people to live, ultimately just learn to like yourself as a person. I think that's the important thing that I tell people. And everything else falls in line. I mean, there are 101 lessons you can give people on how to manage people, what to do, and be fair, do this, do that. But I think that those are the basics. And trust your instinct. After all, when you started something, you did it because you had a passion. You wanted to do something. Trust your instincts. Don't second guess yourself all the time. Don't try and overanalyze. Don't try and wait for too much data, because in startups, you're in a very, very gray situation. Nothing is quite known. You have to take decisions in a very uncertain area. In fact, people ask me, why don't I gamble? Said, I can take a big risk when you talk to me about technology or an area I'm comfortable with. But if you come to me for an area I'm not comfortable with, my risk-taking ability is much lower. I tend to play a lot safer. And gambling, I don't understand. So I tend to play a lot safer. Unless there's a mathematical background to it, and then I can, put some statistics in my head and sort of feel a lot more comfortable. Sorry, long answer to a short question.
No, sir. Like all these takeaways are like what lessons you mentioned are like really, really, really. They're the core fundamentals which, if we implement in every walk of life, it plays such a major role till the end, as you said. Uh, Sir, now, like you have been in this industry for 50 years and like even more so, and even you have been crowned as the pioneer of the IT industry. Yet many people, when you reach heights, like many people slack. But despite all that, despite having despite being so high, like despite achieving so much, you never stopped, and you kept pushing your boundaries, you kept achieving more, you still hold a lot of positions. So what is it that keeps motivating you? Like, how is it that what keeps you going?
So, I've asked myself that question a lot of times, and so has my family, because one of the things you do end up doing when you start a company and you get involved in it is that your family does get neglected, whether you like it or not. And my children are still upset with me because they feel I spend so much more time with my grandchildren that I didn't spend with them. And so I hear that quite often. But that's something that I think happen. I mean, I'm sad about it, but there's nothing I can do about it. So when you say what you know, what would you do differently? What would you? Why am I doing this? I asked myself that question a long time ago, and I thought to myself that, look, what does this country need? And I think this country needs jobs to be created. So as long as I am uh, able to help create jobs, I think it's my responsibility to keep doing what can do that. Right. And I, again, learned this in a very difficult way. I'd gone to my alma mater, IIT Kharagpur, and I was at the guest house. And at that time, I was going through this problem about, hey, company has done enough, I've done enough, the company is growing. I still want to go back and teach and do research. So why don't I go do a PhD and blah, blah, blah. And sometimes it's easy to talk to someone you don't know than to talk to someone you know. So there was this professor from, I think he was the University of Utah at Salt Lake City. And he was sitting across me at dinner, and we got talking, and I asked him this question. And he said, but what do you do? I said, I was telling him about HCL and how at that time we had 300 open positions and we couldn't find the right people to fill them and stuff like that. So he told me, he said, you are creating 300 jobs in this country. It's far more important to do that than to go and get a PhD and teach. He said, you're doing a lot more for India than you would if you became a professor or whatever. And that stuck with me. So that's one thing I do. The second thing I wanted to do was when I sort of retired, if I use that term, I wanted to focus on how to leverage technology in getting healthcare and education to the economically underprivileged in this country. Because if we don't do that, then this country is never going to be able to move out of the problems that we've had, that I've seen my whole life. I mean, and the digital divide will make that separation worse and worse. And you're seeing that in the US right now. So I decided to work with companies that actually were looking to provide solutions in those areas. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I'm basically focused with companies that are leveraging technology both in healthcare and in education. Education, we haven't been too successful because I don't think India is quite ready. The basic infrastructure just doesn't exist. So it's going to take a lot more work. But on healthcare, we are seeing some dramatic results working on infant mortality and malnutrition. And we've done some amazing work in Rajasthan that we are now moving into Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. We are working on telemedicine, giving access, remote access to doctors, working in Bihar and in Uttarakhand and UP. India is a big country. I mean, and I try and get these. I try in most cases not to be dependent on someone for grants. Then you're spending all your time trying to raise money. I try to make it self-sustaining, like a social entrepreneurship. For example, when we do telemedicine, we have an operator we call him a telemedicine operator in a village. He charges 100 rupees per consult with the doctor, right? He has to buy some equipment and all, he has to pay off his loan. But he makes 70 rupees out of that and he gives us 30 rupees. So he earns 15 to 18 to 20,000 rupees a month, right? And there are two of them normally. There has to be a lady and a person because ladies will not come to, how it is in the villages. But the earning is about in that 15 to 20,000 rupees a month, which is not bad for the village. But for us, that 30 rupees makes it self-sustainable. I don't have to ask people for money. I can go and open more and more telemedicine centers around. So it makes it self-sustaining, and and that makes life much easier in terms of you're spending your time and effort on doing what you want to do rather than trying to raise money from people who want answers and this and that and all the usual stuff. So that's what I'm doing after I sort of retired. Working with young people keeps me young. So, and working on new technologies keeps me updated. I mean, I think the world is at a point, and I'm sure your teachers will tell you this, that you have to never stop learning. The day you stop learning, you're deadwood in some form, right? Unfortunately, that's the life in IT, has been for my whole life. And today, that's the life in nearly every field. And so, universities will start doing continuous learning as part of their whatever they do with their alma mater, with their alumni, because that's going to be very, very critical in my view and very important. The other thing I've got to say is that I also did get, how should I say, motivated, inspired by my teachers. And so what I've done is, when I endowed a school of telecom at IIT Kharagpur, I named it after one of my teachers. So it's called the Professor G.S. Sanyal School of Telecommunications. And then I endowed a Center for Innovation, and that I named after another professor. It's called the Professor M.N. Farooqui Center for Innovation. And, I don't know, but I've been told that, I mean, not I've been told, now when I read that is our culture, our history, that we, excuse me, we honor our teachers. And I think it's important because they are the ones who inspired me. So.
True. Going back to your college days and the time when you joined DCM, you had an assured, you had an assured life. You had a good enough pay, but you said that it was the conviction, belief, and the innovation and passion which drove you to start HCL, right? But there would have been a lot of peer pressure, right? A lot of people who decided to stay in the safe zone. What made you come out and take risk in such an uncertain time?
That's a very good question. Actually, no one in my family had ever gone into a business. We were completely teachers, doctors, government servants. That was the family. And in fact, none of the 6 founders, anyone had done any business or any, they all came from similar backgrounds. So I can talk about myself. My parents were very nice. Okay, first thing is, my father was earning, my mother was earning, my wife was earning. I was married by then. And I had a child, right? So I wasn't too worried about the finances because, I mean, it would have impacted your quality of life a certain amount, but the house would carry on. And we were staying with my parents, so that wasn't the problem. Yes, the problem would have been if I had failed, there would have been I would have had a black this thing on my face, but I always felt comfortable that I could get another job. That was my thing. My uncles and aunts and the rest of the family was a different matter. They thought I was mad, and to get them off my back, I used to always say, we're going to change the world. And, somehow people feel when you take that kind of argument, they don't know where to, how to change the world, why you're going to change the world. No one really gets into a discussion. So basically, they sort of, didn't have too much of a discussion with them. But the problem was you're leaving a secure job, you're doing well, you're getting a good salary in a big company. Why are you doing this? 2-3 years later, when the company did well, all my uncles and aunts took the credit for it, by the way. They said, see, we told you so, we knew you were going to do this. But that's the way life is, and that's the way it is in most middle-class families. That's the way it's going to be, unless you come from a business background. That's the way life is going to be. So I think you have to take that decision. I think it's important that your spouse, if you're married, has to be very supportive. I think your parents have to be supportive too, right? And most parents are, most parents want their children to be happy. They want them to do what they want to do, and they may have they may talk to you and say, why are you doing this? And ask you questions out of love and affection. But most of the time, they want you to do what will make you happy. And I think that's important. So I think that's really the experience I had. And the other thing I wanted to mention, which I didn't mention earlier, is that you said, why did you go back to work doing what you're doing? I decided a long time ago that I try to look at what are my assets in the world. I think they're my family, the love that we have, and my friends. And I don't want to lose my friends because they are the only people, in a way, with who can tell me what they think without my getting upset, and I can tell them what I think without them getting upset, even if they don't like it, even if it's the truth and it's the bitter truth, right? And I thought, as the company did well and I became wealthy, that if I try and show my wealth in any way, I might lose my friends. And to me, they were more important than actually having any comfort that my wealth would get me, right? And so I took that decision, and I still believe it is the right decision. I still have my friends. They ask me at times as to, you haven't changed at all, and which is something I feel very good about, that I haven't changed. They're still my friends. It doesn't matter what their economic background is. It doesn't matter where they come from. If I can help them, I try and help them. But to me, that's my biggest asset. As I look at it, that's my biggest asset. I have these friends who I can completely depend on.
True. That's really very, very inspiring. So now that, like, you said that, creating jobs for people and trying to make India where, like, more people get employed, giving them opportunities. So in the current generation, we feel that in schools, there are a lot of skills which could be included, right? Like, there are a lot of things which children can learn while they are still at school, which will help them later in life. So, what kind of skills should children get equipped while they are at school? Which skills would you suggest?
So, first thing is, you got to remember, schools, unfortunately, well, the word is wrong, but schools have to follow a certain curricula because they get measured in a certain way. You got to go CBSE as a curricula. There are these class 10, class 12 exams where the percentage of marks you get become very important, right? They're very important. You have to, how do I put it? I can tell you what I decided in my life, right? Academics are important, and you have to decide, I want to be in the top 10%, I want to be in the top 20%, where I want to be in academics. And if you decide I don't care about academics, then you're probably taking a decision about your future with your eyes open, right? I decided in my life that I would play games and that I would have extracurriculars, right? Like debating, act in plays, get my general knowledge and stuff. And I said, so I was asked a number of times by my grandmother especially, that why don't you come first in class? And I told her, not that I don't try, but that's not my overriding ambition. My overriding ambition is to be amongst the top 3, 4, 5, some number, but to also on the side play cricket for my school, for my college, play football for my college, and act in plays, act in debates, be in quiz competitions and stuff like that. That was the decision I took. And every kid, I think, has to decide for themselves what they want to do, what they want to be. There are some kids who are very smart academically, and they do really well when they become professors and stuff like that. But I really think that you have to. My idea was to try and be more broad based, if I use that term. In fact, another experience from DCM that I should share was that, when we went as management trainees, we were taken to all these units and you had to write a daily diary of what you saw. And most of my other colleagues would write, we saw this and then this machine and this, whatever. I used to say, why do I have to write that? Because, they know what it is, I know what it is. Why do I have to tell them I saw this machine? So I would try and tell them, ask questions as to why do we do this in this way? Why can't we do it in a different way? And I used to get a lot of flack. People would tell me, you kid, you're just out of college. We've been here for so many years. you're trying to tell us how to do our job. And I used to say, no, I'm not. I'm just asking a question. And if you think your system, what you're doing is better than what I'm saying, tell me, because I want to know. That's how I will learn, right? And I find that in my life, I've that questioning everything and trying to find a better way to do it has really helped me. It's like as simple as you get up, and every kid gets up in the morning, has to brush their teeth, wash their face, have a bath, whatever, get ready, have breakfast, and go to school. And invariably, you want to sleep that 5 minutes more, that 10 minutes more, but yet be in time for school. It's human nature. So, how do you do it? So, I used to try and break it down as to what my steps are, how can I optimize them so that I get that 5 minutes more, and yet I make it in time. Right. My mother used to get upset at times, or the servant or whoever, because I would say, I want my breakfast on the table before I come, because I'm going to come at this time. And I don't care if it gets a little cold. And they'd always say, no, no, it'll get cold. So once you come, we'll give you the breakfast. So, things like that. I remember those arguments when I was a kid. But try and look at everything you do. Try and break it up into how can I make it more efficient. And if you start thinking that way, make that your mindset. I think it'll really help you in whatever you do in life. Yes, there'll be lots of people who will question you, give you, tell you you're because no one likes change. But try and see what is the most efficient way of doing things. I find it very helpful for me because and again, I've learned over time, people get upset. I also get upset when people get upset. And I found over time that getting angry doesn't help. So I use humor as a way to overcome it. And I find most people don't know whether you're serious or not. They laugh, but the message gets across. So, that's another learning that I've had in life.
Okay. So, what will be your advice to school students? Like, as in, how should they spend their time on?
So, again, the Indian system, I've been through it. You do 10 subjects. You don't like all of them. Some of them are boring. Then please mug them up, right? I mean, that's a standard thing. Just mug up the subjects you don't like. But the ones that you like, go clear your funders. Go to the library. Go read it up in more detail. Know more about that than anyone else you know. Even your teachers, right? If you can do that, then you're actually, because you can never know everything in complete depth, right? What is a PhD? A PhD is to know one niche thing in really deep, right? As students in school, we get taught a lot of subjects. There's some that you don't like, mug them up. History will be a good example, right? You don't like history, you don't mug up the dates, mug up, the names, and and then you can wrote it out during the exam, get enough marks to do. You don't have to talk, but you'll do okay. But if you like geography or you like, say, science, physics, then go read up about it, right? Take part in the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar essay competition, if it still exists. It did in my time, and stuff like that. Show that you shine in something. I always tell my people in the company, in any company I run, that in one thing, that company has to be the best in the world. You choose that one thing. Sure. What is that one thing that you are the best in the world? And if you are, everyone, your family is proud, you are proud to work for a company that does one thing that's better than anyone else in the world. And that's what I want students to do, that in their one or two subjects that they like, they must know more than anyone else that they know.
Okay. And that yes, sir.
So follow your passion. I think just do that.
Really very motivating, and thank you so much for joining us today, sir. It like the message you have conveyed to all the students and teachers and to all of us present here, it is going to change our lives. So thank you so much.
No, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me for this very, very interesting session. Thank you. Bye now.